Imagine waking up one morning to find your prized possession gone, vanished without a trace, stolen not by criminals, but by the very people meant to uphold your community's rules. It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday morning, but as I stepped outside with my coffee, my heart stopped. The spot where my jet ski had sat just the night before was empty. My sleek midnight blue Sea-Doo, the machine I had spent 2 years saving for, was gone. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, maybe a prank by a neighbor. But as I scanned my driveway in disbelief, my stomach twisted into knots. Panic surged through me as I rushed back inside to check my phone, scrolling through photos from yesterday. There it was, gleaming in my driveway. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had taken it. My hands trembled as I dialed the police, my voice shaking as I reported the theft. While I waited for them to arrive, I knocked on my next-door neighbor's door, hoping for a witness. "Sorry, mate. Didn't see a thing," David said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Then, a voice from across the street cut through the morning air. "Looking for something?" I turned to see Margaret Turner, standing smugly on her porch, watering her garden like she didn't have a care in the world. The smirk on her face sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, that noisy thing? The HOA had it removed this morning," she said casually. "You should check your mail more often." I stood there, fists clenched, trying to process Margaret Turner's words. The HOA had it removed? My stomach dropped. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was outright theft. "What do you mean, removed?" I demanded, marching toward her pristine garden. Margaret barely spared me a glance, her perfectly manicured nails adjusting the flow of her watering can. "New rule," she said nonchalantly. "No recreational vehicles in driveways. It was voted on last week. Immediate enforcement." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "You can't just take someone's property. That's illegal." Margaret sighed as if she were speaking to a child. "Read your mail next time, Liam." She turned back to her flowers, dismissing me like I was a mere inconvenience. I stormed inside, tearing through the pile of unopened letters on my counter. There it was, an official HOA notice, dated 3 days ago, declaring a new bylaw. No boats, jet skis, or other unsightly recreational vehicles visible from the street. Effective immediately. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA president, Gerald Thompson. The line rang. Once, twice. Then a cool, patronizing voice answered. "Thompson speaking." "Gerald, where is my jet ski?" I growled. "Ah, Liam, good to hear from you. If you're referring to the non-compliant vehicle in your driveway, it has already been liquidated to cover administrative fees." I nearly dropped the phone. "Liquidated? What the hell does that mean?" "It was auctioned, Liam." His tone remained infuriatingly calm. "The proceeds covered our enforcement costs." My vision blurred with rage. "You sold my $8,000 jet ski without my permission? That's theft," Gerald chuckled, as if I were amusing him. "Not theft, compliance. Section 7, paragraph 12 of the bylaws grants the board authority to enforce regulations as needed." I was shaking. This wasn't about a jet ski anymore. This was about power, control, and HOA corruption at its worst. "This isn't over," I warned. "Rules are rules," Gerald said, before hanging up. I barely had time to process my fury before my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's not just your jet ski. Ask around. Meeting at my place, 7 p.m. Come alone." My gut told me this was bigger than me, and I was right. At 7 p.m., I knocked on my neighbor David's door, where a small group was already gathered. Faces I recognized: Jenny from 2 blocks over, Mr. Franklin, the Lopez family, and the Jacksons. "My daughter's playhouse," Jenny began, her voice shaking. "Gone. HOA towed it last week." "They took my vintage motorcycle," Mr. Franklin added. "My family's camping trailer," said Mr. Lopez. One by one, the stories poured out. 7 homeowners, 7 stolen properties. All within the past 2 months. This wasn't about rules. This was a racket. I looked around the room, anger boiling inside me. They think they can take whatever they want, but they messed with the wrong people. If you've ever dealt with HOA corruption or power-hungry neighbors, drop a HOA corruption in the comments. And if you want to see how I really took them down, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this fight is just getting started. The room was tense, the air thick with frustration and disbelief. 7 of us, all victims of the HOA's blatant theft, sat in David's living room, staring at the scattered documents and notes we'd pieced together. This isn't enforcement. Jenny said, shaking her head. This is targeted. Every single one of us spoke against Gerald's neighborhood beautification project last spring. And none of us live on Oakwood Circle, I added, tapping a printout of our neighborhood map. They didn't touch anyone over there, just us. It was all clicking into place. Gerald Thompson wasn't just enforcing the rules, he was silencing dissent. Mr. Franklin leaned forward, his wrinkled hands clasped. We need legal action. There's no way they can take our property like this. I've been looking into that, I said, pulling out my laptop. I had spent all night combing through legal sites, trying to make sense of HOA bylaws and state laws. First of all, the new rule they used to justify this? Completely illegal. I turned the screen so everyone could see. According to state law, an HOA must provide at least 30 days notice before enforcing new bylaw changes. They only gave us 3. A murmur ran through the group. Marcus, my next-door neighbor, crossed his arms. And what about them selling our stuff? I scrolled to another case I'd found. Even with proper notice, an HOA cannot seize personal property and sell it without a court order. That means what they did to us was outright theft. Jenny let out a sharp breath. So what do? We can't just storm into a meeting and demand our stuff back? A slow smile spread across my face. No, but we can make this legal. If we build a case, get an attorney, and expose what they're doing, they won't be able to sweep this under the rug. Before anyone could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel outside made us freeze. A sleek black SUV, Gerald's, rolled to a stop across the street. Speak of the devil, Marcus muttered. We watched through the blinds as Gerald and 2 other board members stepped out, their postures stiff, eyes scanning the street. They know we're up to something, David whispered. Good, I said. Let them be scared. Gerald walked up to my driveway, glancing at my house like it was his to control. Then, without knocking, he turned back to his car and drove off. He's trying to intimidate us, Jenny said. Then we hit back harder, I replied. First thing tomorrow, I'm filing a police report for stolen property. Then we take this fight to the courts. They thought they could break us. They had no idea what was coming. The room was tense, the air thick with frustration and disbelief. 7 of us, all victims of the HOA's blatant theft, sat in David's living room, staring at the scattered documents and notes we'd pieced together. This isn't enforcement, Jenny said, shaking her head. This is targeted. Every single one of us spoke against Gerald's neighborhood beautification project last spring. And none of us live on Oakwood Circle, I added, tapping a printout of our neighborhood map. They didn't touch anyone over there, just us. It was all clicking into place. Gerald Thompson wasn't just enforcing the rules, he was silencing dissent. Mr. Franklin leaned forward, his wrinkled hands clasped. We need legal action. There's no way they can take our property like this. I've been looking into that, I said, pulling out my laptop. I had spent all night combing through legal sites, trying to make sense of HOA bylaws and state laws. First of all, the new rule they used to justify this? Completely illegal. I turned the screen so everyone could see. According to state law, an HOA must provide at least 30 days notice before enforcing new bylaw changes. They only gave us 3. A murmur ran through the group. Marcus, my next-door neighbor, crossed his arms. And what about them selling our stuff? I scrolled to another case I'd found. Even with proper notice, an HOA cannot seize personal property and sell it without a court order. That means what they did to us was outright theft. Jenny let out a sharp breath. So what do? We can't just storm into a meeting and demand our stuff back? A slow smile spread across my face. No, but we can make this legal. If we build a case, get an attorney, and expose what they're doing, they won't be able to sweep this under the rug. Before anyone could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel outside made us freeze. A sleek black SUV, Gerald's, rolled to a stop across the street. Speak of the devil, Marcus muttered. We watched through the blinds as Gerald and 2 other board members stepped out, their postures stiff, eyes scanning the street. They know we're up to something, David whispered. Good, I said. Let them be scared. Gerald walked up to my driveway, glancing at my house like it was his to control. Then, without knocking, he turned back to his car and drove off. He's trying to intimidate us, Jenny said. Then we hit back harder, I replied. First thing tomorrow, I'm filing a police report for stolen property. Then, we take this fight to the courts. They thought they could break us. They had no idea what was coming. The morning after Gerald's little intimidation stunt, I walked into the local police station with a folder full of documents, security footage, and a list of names. It was time to make things official. I need to report multiple counts of stolen property, I said, placing the folder on the desk of Officer Reynolds, a veteran cop with tired eyes and a skeptical look. He flipped through the pages. You're saying your HOA took your jet ski without permission? Not just mine, I corrected. 7 other homeowners had property seized and sold illegally. Reynolds sighed. HOA disputes are usually civil matters. You should take this up in court. I leaned forward. They took private property and sold it without a court order. That's theft. And if you check the state law on HOAs, they violated multiple regulations. This isn't just a dispute, officer. It's a crime. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll take a statement and forward this to the county prosecutor. No promises, but I'll look into it. It wasn't the full victory I wanted, but it was a start. When I got home, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Gerald's bringing a lawyer. I smirked. Good. Let's see how they handled the truth. That evening, I arrived at the community center, folder in hand. The room was packed, dozens of neighbors, many of whom I hadn't even met before. The atmosphere was tense. At the front of the room sat Gerald, flanked by Linda and 2 board members, along with a man in a crisp navy suit, no doubt their lawyer. Gerald stood, his smug smile in place. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that the HOA operates in the best interest of the community. Recently, certain individuals have been spreading misinformation and making baseless accusations against the board. Misinformation? I clenched my jaw, but before I could speak, an unexpected voice cut through the room. Tell me, Gerald, Mr. Franklin, the elderly homeowner whose motorcycle had been stolen, said, standing up. Was it misinformation when you took my Harley from my driveway? Or when you fined the Jacksons for having a canoe? Or when you destroyed the Lopez family's camper? Whispers erupted. People were angry. Gerald's smile faltered. All enforcement actions were taken in accordance with community bylaws. I took a step forward. No, they weren't. I held up a printed copy of state law. This document clearly states that HOA rule changes require a 30-day notice before enforcement. You gave us 3. This law also states that an HOA cannot seize personal property without a court order. You sold our belongings illegally. That makes you a thief. Gerald's lawyer stood. This meeting isn't the place for legal discussions. Oh, but it is, I shot back. Because the police now have a copy of this report. You can try to brush this under the rug, but this is going to court, whether you like it or not. The room erupted. People shouted, demanding answers. Gerald's face turned red, but before he could respond, Linda hissed something in his ear. He stood abruptly. This meeting is over. But the damage was done. The board had lost control, and they knew it. The meeting may have ended, but the battle was far from over. As neighbors spilled out of the community center, voices buzzed with anger and determination. Some were still in shock over what had been revealed. Others were ready for war. And then there were the ones who had known all along, who had turned a blind eye to the corruption because it hadn't affected them. Yet, I lingered outside with Marcus and a few others, watching as Gerald and his lawyer hurried toward their cars. Linda, ever the snake, pulled out her phone, whispering furiously into it as she shot us looks of pure venom. They're up to something, Marcus muttered. You can feel it. I nodded. They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I wasn't wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a letter taped to my front door. Violation notice. Unauthorized gathering. Fine. $2,500. I stared at it, rage bubbling beneath the surface. So this was their next move. Hit us with fines until we either backed down or bled out financially. A knock at the door snapped me from my thoughts. It was Rachel, the woman whose kid's treehouse had been destroyed. She held up an identical letter. Looks like they're going after all of us. One by one, neighbors started showing up, clutching the same violation notices. Gerald and his cronies had fined everyone who had spoken up at the meeting last night. It was retaliation, plain and simple. They can't do this, Marcus growled. They can't just make up rules to punish us. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the paper. They're testing us, seeing if we'll fold. Are we? Rachel asked. I shook my head. Not a chance. That afternoon, I met with Sophie, the lawyer who had approached me after the meeting. I laid the fine notices on the table between us. Expected, she said, skimming through them. Classic intimidation tactic. They want you scared, tied up in bureaucracy, too exhausted to keep fighting. Well, it's not working, I said through clenched teeth. What can we do? Sophie leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. We sue. A class action lawsuit against the HOA board for unlawful property seizure, failure to follow state regulations, and now harassment. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's big. It is, Sophie agreed, but they've given us everything we need. The illegal property sales, the bogus fines, the threats. She looked at me. If we do this, there's no turning back. I met her gaze. We've already crossed that line. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table drafting my formal complaint, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Drop the case, or you'll regret it. I stared at the message. They were scared. Good. The morning after I received the anonymous threat, I wasn't surprised when Marcus showed up on my doorstep, his jaw tight with frustration. He held up his phone, shaking it in disbelief. Someone slashed my tires last night, he said. All 4 of them. My stomach twisted. You think it was them? I don't believe in coincidences, he muttered. Neither did I. We weren't just dealing with an overreaching HOA anymore. This was organized, deliberate intimidation. First, they took our property. Then, they tried to drown us in fines. Now, they were coming after us personally. I checked my security cameras and saw what I expected. Someone in a hooded sweatshirt creeping up Marcus's driveway at 2:47 a.m., a knife flashing in their hand. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify them, but that didn't matter. The message was loud and clear. I forwarded the video to Sophie. She called back almost immediately. This is a game changer, she said. Property disputes are one thing, but now we have criminal activity on our hands. Think it's enough for the police to take this seriously? I asked. She sighed. They should, but given Gerald's connections, don't count on it. She was right. When Marcus and I walked into the police station later that afternoon, the officer on duty barely looked up from his desk as we explained the situation. When I showed him the video, he frowned, scratching his head. Not much to go on, he said. Could be anybody. Anybody? Marcus scoffed. This started the second we challenged the HOA. The officer sighed. Look, I'll file a report, but without a clear ID, there's not much we can do. Translation? We're not touching this. We left the station angrier than when we arrived. That's when I made a decision. If the law wouldn't protect us, we'd have to protect ourselves. That night, we set up a plan. Marcus and I installed additional security cameras, hidden this time, facing our driveways, doors, and property lines. We reached out to every neighbor affected, warning them to be on high alert. And then, we waited. It didn't take long. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and tapped into the live feed. A figure was crouched by my mailbox, spray can in hand, tagging my property. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing my phone, I called Marcus, who was already awake. They're here, I whispered. I'm on my way. I didn't wait for him. Barefoot, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I flung open the front door. Hey, I bellowed. The figure spun, startled. I caught a glimpse of their face in the glow of my porch light. Linda. Her eyes widened in panic and she bolted. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The cameras had caught everything. The HOA had just made their biggest mistake yet. I stood on my porch, breath still heavy from the rush of adrenaline, watching Linda vanish into the night like a coward. But it didn't matter. My cameras had everything. Her face, her spray can, the vandalism she left behind. By the time Marcus arrived, I was already reviewing the footage. He took one look at the screen and let out a low whistle. She really thought she could get away with this, he muttered. She's desperate, I said, fast-forwarding through the footage. They all are. They know we have them cornered. And desperate people make mistakes. By morning, the HOA's tactics had escalated even further. Every single person who had stood with us received violation notices, petty infractions designed to harass us. Marcus's fence was suddenly too high. The Lopez family's mailbox was not up to code. Jenny's front yard had excessive decorative elements. And me? I woke up to a $10,000 lien notice on my house. They're trying to bankrupt us into submission, Marcus said through gritted teeth. This is extortion, plain and simple. He wasn't wrong. But what the HOA hadn't counted on was that I had something more powerful than money. I had evidence. Her face drained of color. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but the way her arms flailed wildly told me she was trying to talk her way out of it. The officers weren't buying it. Within minutes, they slapped handcuffs on her wrists. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as Linda Prescott, the HOA's enforcer, was led to a squad car. And just like that, their little empire began to crack. But the war wasn't over yet. I turned to Marcus. Gerald's next, he nodded. And when he falls, the whole damn house of cards is coming down. Linda's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People whispered in hushed voices, watching as the police car disappeared down the street. For years, she had been the HOA's attack dog, enforcing ridiculous fines and harassing homeowners with a smug grin. But now, she was just another criminal caught in the act. The moment her car was out of sight, my phone lit up with messages. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak before were suddenly eager to talk. Is it true? One text read. They arrested Linda? What happens now? Another asked. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. By the next morning, the HOA's remaining board members scrambled to contain the damage, but they underestimated just how much momentum we had gained. A petition was already circulating to remove Gerald and his cronies from power. More homeowners were stepping forward with complaints, and with Linda out of the picture, they had no one left to enforce their corrupt rules. Then, the real bombshell dropped. Sophie arrived at my house just after lunch, holding a thick stack of legal documents. She looked excited. Almost too excited. You're gonna love this, she said, setting the papers down on my kitchen table. What is it? I asked, flipping through the pages. Financial records, she said with a grin. The HOA's been bleeding money for years. And guess who's been profiting? I didn't need to guess. I already knew. Gerald. The so-called president of the HOA had been using community funds for personal expenses. Lavish dinners, expensive vacations, even a brand new car. And thanks to Sophie's digging, we now had proof. This is fraud, Marcus muttered, staring at the records in disbelief. Fraud, embezzlement, and probably a dozen other charges, Sophie confirmed. The question is, what do we do with it? I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. We take him down, I said. For good. This was it, the final nail in the coffin for Gerald and the corrupt HOA. But the fight wasn't over yet. What would you do if you uncovered financial fraud in your own community? Would you expose it, confront them, or take legal action? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you've been following this story, you won't want to miss what happens next. Will Gerald finally face justice? Will the HOA crumble once and for all? Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the explosive conclusion. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends.